So first of all, many thanks to Professor Rollinger and organizer of... No? Thank you. For the great opportunity, and then thank you very much. It's very nice to meet you all early in the morning at 9 o'clock here. So, the cult of Mithras flourished in the 2nd century CE. Archaeological evidence suggests that the cult was spread throughout the western part of the Roman Empire, from northern Britain down to the Rhine and Danube area. Around 500 cultic images, the Tauroctony, the bull-slaying scene, 38 temples called Mitraeum, and more than 100 inscriptions have been excavated. The majority located in Rome, of course, Ostia, and the Rhine-Danube frontier area, the Latin-speaking provinces. The Mithraic temples each followed a similar structure and architectural plan, but not so much in interior design. They usually included a hallway at the center, which ended at the cultic relief, fresco or freestanding statue showing the bull-slaying scene. 2 long benches furnished the hallway on both right and left side, as you can see here, and it's the statue here is like it's the cultic relief. Tauroctony. 2 long benches furnished the hallway on both the right and left side. A sacrificial altar, some niches, and a few rooms around the hallway often decorated the interior spaces of Mithraea. Some Mithraea were decorated with fresco representing the mystagogus and initiate performing the initiation ritual, the portrait of Mithras and his attendants, Cautus and Cautopates, Sol and Luna. The image and a statue of Cronus and Serapis. In opposition to the rich interior design, the Mithraea usually appeared architectural simple from outside. This architectural choice perhaps points to the mystical character of the cult, whereby both the initiate and the cultic monuments conceal the mysteries from non-initiate. The ambience of the Mithraeum, along with its interior decoration, garnishing the Tauroctony, transmitted cultic notion and beliefs to the initiate. The Tauroctony, as the main cultic icon, depicted Mithras dressed in a Persian garment. Here you can see, and slaying the bull with a dagger. This scene is usually decorated with other cultic symbols, such as the zodiac sign, cultic animals, such as the dog, serpent, scorpion, and Mithras attendant. Scholars have argued that the interior design of Mithraea reflects the Mithraic cosmology and the cult's character as an astral cult. And this is the plan of the floor of the Mithraeum 7 sphere, actually. For instance, the mosaic ladder of the 7-sphere Mithraeum shows 7 arches on the floor of the main hall, starting at the entrance and ending near the cult niche, where the god Mithras slayed the bull. The planetary symbols, Mars, Venus, and Saturn on the left, and Moon, Mercury, and Jupiter on the right, decorated the arches on both sides. As is typical with architecture for Mithraea, benches line both sides of the main hall, embellished with the signs of the zodiac. Pisces, Aquarius, Capricorn, Sagittarius, Scorpio, and Libra are found on the right, while Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo appear on the left. The 2nd century Middle Platonist Celsus state that, according to the Mithraic mysteries, there is a ladder with 7 gates for the soul's genesis and apogenesis in the world, and each gate is ascribed to a specific planet. The first is attributed to Saturn, the second to Venus, the third to Jupiter, fourth to Mercury, the fifth to Mars, the sixth to the Moon, and the seventh to the Sun, which is Mithras himself. Souls descend and ascend into and out of the world through these gates, protected by those gods ascribed to each planet. Relying on Celsus, Mithraic scholars argue the 7 arches on the floor in the 7-sphere Mithraeum act as the gates of the ladder through which the souls descend and ascend into the world. And the planetary symbol depicted at their corner are the signs of planetary gods who protect these gates. As of the 1970s, a scholar such as Roger Beck, actually this tradition basically started by Insler, but then well developed and well expanded by Roger Beck, argued that the Mitraya represent the cosmos and everything within it, and that the initiate imitate the soul's genesis and apogenesis by performing ritual in this microcosmos and passing through the arches on the floor. It was through this ritual imitation that initiate internalized cultic notion and beliefs. Thus, Beck proposes the Mitraya were a necessary component of a greater process that prepared the initiate for cultic experience. And I should say, for acquiring the cultic community, cultic identity, Mitraic identity. Yet, it is necessary to mention this scholarly interpretation of the Mitraic temple has been open to doubt due to its strong reliance on Middle and Neoplatonic sources, and in fact, the cult's astrological dimension is particularly evidenced in only a few cases. For example, such as the seven-sphere Mitraium in Ostia, but not everywhere. For example, in San Clement, there is no trace of that. Additionally, the astronomical Platonic interpretation of Roman Mitraya neglect the aesthetic of cultic architecture and interior design of Mitraya by attributing them to the Platonic notion of microcosmos and soul's genesis and apogenesis to the world. Moreover, I doubt such a deep understanding of astronomical and Platonic understanding was found among the cultic initiate Roman Mitraists who participated in the Mitraic ritual and mostly belonged to the Roman army and administration rather than the intelligentsia who would have been more familiar with such notions. Challenging this view, more recently, a scholar, notably Richard Goron, have suggested using Persianism to explain the Greco-Roman appropriation of the Persian god Mitra, whereby the Roman Mitraists attempted to validate and to portray their god as a Persian deity. Accordingly, Persianism in the context of Roman Mitraism is the process whereby Mitraic mystagogues appropriate their knowledge about the Persian Mitra from external sources, particularly I should say Greek historiography, and transform this knowledge into the Mitraic iconography and ritual language. As mentioned before, all Roman Mitraya whether they be a natural cave, such as Mitraium Giovanni, this one, or constructed Mitraium San Clement, this one in Rome, included a hallway ended to the cultic fresco or freestanding statue which portrayed the god slaying the bull. The cultic iconography of Mithras, mainly the Tauroctony, usually portrayed the gods dressed in long-sleeved tunic and Persian trousers, evoking Herodotus and Strabo's imagery of Persians. The iconography of the god became later more orientalized in the Roman cultural political milieu through the addition of curly hair and Phrygian cap. Of course, my point here is not to ignore the local varieties of Mitraic iconography, but rather to focus on the constant feature found in Mitraic visual language. As such, Roman mystagogues deliberately borrowed the Hellenistic imagery of Persian, the so-called handsome Oriental in Schneider terminology, together with the Greek topoi of Persian as expert in archery and horse riding to emphasize the Persian origin of their god. I have discussed elsewhere, basically it was my PhD dissertation, why the Mitraic mystagogues were motivated for creating a novel visual language that stressed the Persian provenance of their god. I explored how this iconography could be read as a mode of visual rhetoric that the Mitraic mystagogues employed to historicize their cult and cultic brotherhood. They used such an iconography representing Mithras as a Persian god to link their cult to the secrecy and esoteric knowledge that were associated with Persia and Persian religion, as it was understood in the Greek and later in the Roman world. This visual language provided their cultic community with a history other than Roman history, replacing it with an origin from an Eastern one, from Persia, Rome's favorite enemy. This mode of historicization is also evidenced through the works written by Roman authors, Middle and Neoplatonists, who had no personal engagement to the cult. Now, considering this, and for the purpose of this paper, I would like to draw your attention to the architecture and interior design of Mitraya as it complements the process of Persianism in the context of Roman Mitraism and demonstrate the Mitraic mystagogues' effort for historicizing their cult and cultic brotherhood. Here I would like to propose an alternative reading to astrological cosmological interpretation of Roman Mitraya that understand this sacred site as micro model of the cosmos. Statist-wise, is perhaps one of the most appropriate examples that hints a novel reading of the Roman Mitraya in the light of Persianism, where we read whether it is best to call Eurosi Titan in the fashion of the Achaemenian race, Ahura Mazda, or Osiris, the grain bringer, or Mithras twisting the horns, wrote to follow in the rocks of Persia's cover. Some scholars understand this passage in relation to the Greek topoi of Persian as expert in archery and horse riding, and others ascribe it to the Zoroastrian pseudepigrapha. Yet, apart from this interpretation, this description refers not only to the god's action in controlling the bull, but also to the cave rocks mountains of Persia consecrated for worshipping the god. Indeed, the Roman Mitraium at first glance is a cave sanctuary for the gods Hierophany and the initiate experience of Theophany. Obviously, here I am referring to Eliade. But it is also a miniature scene, a diorama of the rocks, mountain, cave of Persia, where the event of the cultic myth happened. Likewise, the 3rd century Neoplatonist Porphyry writes, thus, also the Persians, mystically signifying the descent of the souls into sublunary region and its regression from it, initiate the mystic or him who is admitted to the arcane sacred rite in a place which they denominate a cavern. For, as Eubulus says, Zoroaster was the first who consecrated in the neighboring mountain of Persia, spontaneously produced cave, florid, and having fountain in honor of Mitra, the maker and father of all things. A cave, according to Zoroaster, being a resemblance of the world which was fabricated by Mitra. It's exactly Platonic perception of microcosmos. This fragment points out at least 2 issues. First, the consecration of the cave by Zoroaster for worshipping the god Mitra, and then linking the cult to the Magi tradition and Persia. This latter issue is shared between Roman authors, Middle and Neoplatonists. In Celsus' narrative of the cult, which was handed down to us via the 3rd century Christian apologists, Origen read, this truth, the notion and beliefs, are obscurely represented by the teaching of the Persians and by the mystery of Mithras, which is of Persian origin. We know that these descriptions of the cult are pseudo-history, since the Roman cult of Mithras was established neither by Zoroaster in Persia nor by the Magi in Asia Minor. Indeed, this pseudo-historiography should be read alongside the Middle and Neoplatonist own agenda, which was to connect the Roman cult with the Magi tradition, whose teaching and philosophy were believed to have served as the bedrock for Plato's own religious doctrine and philosophy. However, while this pseudo-historiography strongly supports the astronomical Platonic interpretation of Roman Mitraya, it also points to a novel reading of Roman Mitraya in the context of Persianism. As such, my point here is not to ignore the Roman authors' Middle and Neoplatonist description of the cult and its architecture, but rather to concentrate on the aesthetic level and visual language of Roman cultic iconography and architecture that caused those authors to reach such conclusion. There is no clear answer to the question as how the sacred sites are selected. Sacred space does not exist naturally, but it's usually demarcated by individual or groups of people by ascribing cultic myth and narrative to the space. The function of caves as sanctuaries, together with the association of caves as the micromodel of the cosmos, were familiar phenomena in the archaic and classical Greek period, and later in the Roman Republic and imperial time. In the case of Roman Mitraism, we have no primary sources available revealing the reason why Roman mystagogues desire to have consecrated caves, whether natural or handmade, as their sacred space. Yet Mithraik Mystagoras could deliberately, and I should say successfully, tie the idea of cave sanctuary to the cultic myth. Here I'm referring to the god Mithras as he was Petrogenes or born of the rock, perhaps streamed from the Armenian Mehr. To create a visual language promoting their cultic doctrine and belief. As such, the Mithraea can be understood in relation to the role which they play in the cult's myth and in resembling the mythical ambience of the god's birth and provenance. Yet, rather than focusing on the source used by the Roman Mithraeans for selecting the caves as their sacred sites, I would like to touch upon the dynamic which motivated the Roman Mithraic Mystagoras to create an ex novo visual language, including both iconography and architecture. Tracing their god and their cult back to Persia, here there are cultural, religious, and even political discourses that shape the attitude of Mithraic Mystagoras and promoted them to present their god as a Persian god slaying the bull in a cave. It was their creation of cultic visual language that also enabled a non-initiate, including Roman thinker, Middle and Neoplatonists, to situate the cult in Persia. Moreover, returning to the Mithraic Mystagoras' assertion of the Persian provenance of their god, or as Richard Gordon calls it, their internal claims, the cultic iconography and architecture they created provided an appropriate context for the non-initiate to locate the cult in Persia. Indeed, this internal claim strongly influenced the perception of ordinary Romans who were not adherent initiate of the cult and helped the descriptions of intellectuals who had no personal engagement with the cult, such as the case of Statius and Porphyry. Here I like to examine the Roman Mithraea in relation to Pierre Nora's concept of lieu de mémoire. In Nora's world, a lieu de mémoire is any significant entity, whether material or non-material in nature, which by dint of human will or the work of time has become a symbolic element of the material heritage of any community, in this case, Mithraic community. Thus, the Roman Mithraea can be understood as a lieu de mémoire, the memory space, in the eyes of both initiate and non-initiate, with no engagement in the call. Whether natural or constructed, Mithraea are material elements which symbolize the cultic myth of the god's birth and the sacred moment of his manifestation by exhibiting the handsome oriental god slaying the bull or exhibiting him as Petrogenes at the center. This ambience alluded to a mythical geography of those handsome Orientals who were inhabitants of the other side of the world. In Nora's world, Roman Mithraea were natural and artificial, simple and ambiguous, concrete and abstract. They were Leo, places, site, causes in three senses, material, symbolic, and functional. They link the initiate to the indefinite moment of the god's epiphany and function as the remembrance of Roman Mithraic brotherhood. It was in this space that the Mithraic initiate experienced the theophany and acquired the sense of belonging to the Mithraic brotherhood, a society with an origin in the Orient, in Persia. Additionally, the Roman Mithraea were also the Mithraic lieu de mémoire, evoking the Oriental provenance of the god, the Persian rock and mountains in the eyes of non-initiate, the Oriental imagery of the god and its representation at the center of a cave sanctuary, enable the non-initiate to trace the call to Persia, the land of Zoroaster, his esoteric knowledge and the tradition of Magi. This is why we find Zoroaster, the founder of Magi tradition, as he who consecrated the cave for worshipping the god Mithra and later Mithras in the Roman world. Yet, lieu de mémoire, the memory space, stands on the border between memory and history. It is through the process of imagination, memory, and remembering that the lieu de mémoire function and participate in the process of historicizing and identifying, and this is the key leading us to the final section of my paper. Returning to the query of those discourses motivating the Mithraic Mystagoras for the visual language, let me to contextualize the Roman cultic iconography and architecture, the Mithraic lieu de mémoire, in the broader political, cultural context of the Roman Empire. Your group defines the historicization of religion as a process whereby a current religious phenomenon is constructed or imagined to have roots in the past. Framing their cult as Persian was a rhetorical strategy that mythologists used to provide their cult and community with a history, with a god who originates from the Orient. In doing so, the Mithraists used the quality of secrecy and esoteric knowledge that were associated with Persian religion. Moreover, historicizing their cult in this way, the Mithraists participated in the larger discourse of Rome's self-identification and her imagination of Eastern neighbor. Romans identified themselves vis-a-vis other. The depiction of the god Mithras, the visual language, and the ritual that grow up around the cult and the god reflects Rome's perception of the Orient, what people nowadays call Roman Orient, and the Persian in particular. In other words, it was not the case that Romans simply depicted and borrowed the god Mithras from his Persian milieu, as has been considered traditionally. Rather, I'm arguing that the Roman Mithraists embraced a certain Greek stereotype of mysterious other tied to people from the Orient, the trope of the so-called handsome Oriental, in order to assert the Oriental provenance of their god. Here I suggest that Mithraic visual and ritual language should be interpreted in relation to Rome's political strategy and her efforts for cultural identity. The appearance of the Persian Mithra in the Roman Empire should be understood as a part of Rome's imperial ideology and her claim on ruling the world and not the city of Rome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Vielen herzlichen Dank. Gibt es Fragen oder Anregungen?
Thank you very much for this novel approach to Mithras. But I would like to ask you if you could be more specific about this Platonic element, which I think you used to sort of diminish the importance of the written evidence. Could you show us more specifically what is Platonic in this in this worldview? That is because I read Plato a long time ago, and I just don't remember to what Plato's dialogues you are referring.
Okay. First of all, I thank you very much for the question. And actually, I didn't want to ignore or to not consider those texts, but I just wanted to somehow explain that they have a kind of specific or personal purposes in their writing. And basically, Platonic interpretation of the cave is. I'm not sure it is started by Plato himself, because like many scholars trace the idea back to Pythagoras even, and then this idea was also presented by Zeno in Stoicism, as far as I know, but the whole idea is about considering cave as a micro model, as a small model, a miniature model of the cosmos, and genesis and apogenesis of the soul in the cosmos. Basically coming into the world and then living to the world, about the soul ascending and descending, the souls of the dead descending and ascending. And basically they consider, usually like the Platonic, Middle and Neoplatonists, they consider a cave, even Mithraic cave, as the micro model for Plato's cosmology, considering genesis and apogenesis, which is really hard to prove, at least according to archaeological artifacts, according to extant artifacts. And you know that we don't have any primary source remain or written by Mithraic mystagogues themselves, so it's very hard to prove the idea. In addition, I can also add, I guess, it should be also understand in relation to cave allegory, Plato's cave allegory, and acquiring knowledge in relation to that.
Thank you. Weitere Fragen? Professor Rollinger.
Thank you very much also for this rethinking of the whole topic. Can you tell us a little bit more about those people who were attracted by the cult, so the audience, so to say, and what made this cult especially attractive? Because it was for a certain time, it was very, very successful.
Yeah, the cult flourishes particularly in the 2nd and 3rd century. And actually inscriptions and the decadatory inscription basically show that the majority of initiates were Roman military and people who were part of Roman administration. But we have some very rarely, but we have some also inscription including the name of women, for example Adora Mitraion. But basically cult flourished well on the western part of the empire and mainly by the Roman military. We have also some sign from the interest of Roman emperor, for example, Emperor Julian, or under the Severan dynasty, Emperor Septimius Severus, because he was basically so relaxed about foreign cults because of his wife Julia Domna, and also about Emperor Commodus, but we are not sure that they really participate in the cultic ritual or they really belong to the society. But we have some dedicatory inscription from them, and we have some also idea about their financial support, I can say.
Thank you. Professor Rufing.
May I add another question? Thank you so much for your paper. Given that the main venerators of Mithras were soldiers, do you think they gathered the whole concept of cosmology? And the other point is, if mainly soldiers are the venerators of Mithras, as the inscriptions make us think, how does it work to underline or to emphasize the Persian origin of the cult, given that, especially under Septimius Severus, there were a lot of wars against Parthia?
Yeah. If I got you correctly, or I prefer to give you two different answers. For the first part, and then, thank you. Okay, for the first part, I do agree with you, definitely, no doubt. Actually, one of the main critiques toward the cosmological interpretation of Mitraion and Roman Mithraism is because of this problem that we can be sure that all Roman initiates, based on their situation and their position in the empire, they could get such a complex notion of Platonic cosmology. And because of that, many scholars, established scholars, not like me, junior, the real one, they are trying to find some alternative for this interpretation. But at the same time, the fact that we cannot ignore the Middle and Platonic interpretation of the cult, because they are, to be honest, they are the only written literal sources that we have and available. So we cannot ignore them, we should consider them, but at the same time, it's very hard to accept that, for example, Roman soldiers who spend most of their life in war and in fighting could get such a complex idea, which is not really easy to explain. And for the second question, actually, I think that's the most fascinating part of Roman Mithraism, that people, or initiate, they imitated a god, or they worship a god which was the god of their enemy. The people that they fight the whole time with them, but it was a kind of, because, by the way, when the Roman Mithras flourished in the Roman Empire, we are at the exactly after the Augustan cultural political revolution, when Augustus decided for solving the Roman crisis, Augustus decided to open the gates of the Rome, and somehow try to assimilate and to appropriate all cultures of others and enemies. You know, it was a kind of, I mean, in my opinion, it's a kind of identification through your opposition. You know what I mean? Because we usually identify ourselves vis-a-vis other. Yeah, it's always self vis-a-vis other. Yeah, so it's like that. And by the way, Persia was always a big but favorite enemy for them, and not even for Romans, even for their ancestor Greeks. You know, so I think that's because of that. And the interesting point is that the cult basically flourished in the Latin West, on the western side of the empire, which had less contact with Persia compared to the.
These are the soldiers of Septimius Severus who come to the west, at least for the Rhine frontier, let's say. Rome is a different, Rome itself is a different story. Yeah. But wouldn't you agree that the literary sources are a very different layer of reception than, let's say, Roman soldiers? For them, the cult might have been attractive since they are a band of brothers, let's say, you know. And as far as we know, Mitraic, the Cultores Mitre were a band of brothers, so might be natural that soldiers are attracted, and how Neoplatonists conceived the Mitraic cult might be quite different, isn't it?
Yes, yes. Yeah, I mean, I do agree in some level, but at the same time, I think we should consider that in the Latin West we have also imperial cults. Like well flourished, so perhaps as a kind of competition with the imperial cult, or you know, by the yes, but it could be also possible because we now have both cults basically were followed mainly by soldiers and Roman army, so it could be because of that as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nina, for so interesting presentation. I really enjoy it. And but I have a very small question as a layman about the material evidence, because you on your slides you showed us the Mitraeum found in Venice, you know, and discovered in 1965, I believe.
Which one? Giovanni?
No, the picture next to it, I think. Could you show us?
Saint Clement.
Could you show us this slide? I cannot recall it now. I know that there was a Venice over there.
Can I turn this?
Oh, does it work?
Oh, okay.
And next one. There's another one. Next one.
This one?
Yes, and discovered.
This is Giovanni, as I mentioned.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Giovanni.
I presume that these sites are rather difficult to find, as I presume they are located in areas that are not so obvious for people who are looking for them, most likely, right? Or
it depends on the map of the city at that time.
Okay, but I just I would like to know, are there any excavation conducted in order just to find the Mitrea all around the Roman Empire area, or they are not a subject of specific investigations?
No, they are not. As far as I know, at least today, they are not subject of a specific excavation. No, I don't think so. But okay, just randomly, time by time, some excavation has been done and they get published. That's it.
And so far,
and by the way, this one is not in the corpus. It's in the supplementary of the corpus.
I see.
Yes,
I see.
because it's very, not very recent, but it was recent.
Yes, and so far, how many sites do we know? 40 approximately? Mitrea?
30, okay. 38, but I should say between 38 to 42, even 45, because this is not agreed you know what I mean? But like the source that I refer to it got published in 2016, and till that time it was like a kind of agreement on 38.
Oh, I see.
But this is not a specific. I mean, I can't be sure. I can't be precise for that. You know what I mean?
Yes, yes, of
because
course.
it really depends on the publication on excavation report and, you know, the help of our archaeological friends,
Yes, sure.
archaeologists. So.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nina Jan, for the talk. I just had a comment, but also I'm curious. So we know in the East, what you call Persia, there is the deity Mithra, which is a god of judgment and has a very different function. And then you have on the West, you might say Mediterranean, your Mithras that you're talking about. And then in the middle, there's Armenia, which has Mir, right? Which is a different type of, it's a god that comes out of a rock, it's born. But I wanted to see this Roman Mithraism, which has this Persian sort of Oriental sort of reception of it. How far east does it go? I think, am I correct to think it's Syria as the boundary where this cult makes its appearance?
Yes.
And why do you think it wasn't popular or became interesting further east? The Roman Mithra.
First of all, thank you very much for your comment and question. But as I explained in the previous question, I mean, since the majority of followers were soldiers, it could be because of the Roman military, and also I believe, I'm not sure, I believe in the competition with the imperial cult on the Latin West, but at the same time, the most interesting enigma, which is still unsolved, is the situation of the cult in eastern part. But the fact that, as you mentioned, like we have some archaeological artifacts, for example, in Syria, like in Dora Mitraeum, like for example, we have the Huarte Mitraeum, we have Israeli Tauroctony, exactly on the border, which they represent some unique elements and sign, which somehow are different from the style of and also the iconography, visual language of Roman Mithraism in the West. But relating to Armenian Mer, I should say I do definitely agree with you that as you mentioned, that not only Pontus and Armenia, but even the entire world of Asia Minor was the bridge for transmitting the god from Persia to the Roman world. But I mean, I'm not sure we can claim that the creation of the cult, the invention of the cult was happened at that area. But of course, for example, we have some sign that we can trace it back to that region. For example, the Petragenous Mitra, obviously. It should.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wenn es keine weiteren Fragen mehr gibt, dann bedanke ich mich ganz herzlich für den Vortrag. Thank you for your talk.
Thank you very much. Thank you.